Hello and welcome to the Software Engineering Unlocked podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Michaela, and today I have the pleasure to talk to Luca Galante, who will talk with me about platform engineering. But before I start, let me tell you a bit about my latest project, awesomecode-reviews.com. Yeah, all my work on code reviews has now its own dedicated home. At awesomecode-reviews.com, you will find articles about code review best practices, code review checklists, news about the latest research on code reviews, and of course, workshops and courses I offer around this topic. So please hop over to awesomecode-reviews.com and check out my latest work. But now back to Luca. Luca is leading product at Humanitech and saw hundreds of DevOps and platform setups. And he condensed all his learnings into his weekly newsletter that's called Platform Weekly, which has 10,000 subscribers. He's also the core contributor to the platform engineering community that has more than 10,000 meetup members, more than 8,000 Slack members, and they're also having a platform con. This is a conference about platform engineering that has over 6,000 attendees in just one day. Wow! So I think he knows a lot about platform engineering. I will pick his brain today. So I'm so happy that you're here, Luca, with me today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So I asked people today before having this conversation with you, I asked them, so what do you think about platform engineering? And they were like, what? Platform what?
What
I
is
said,
that?
yeah, platform engineering. Yeah, exactly. So can you maybe outline a little bit what is platform engineering? And I actually know that it's a little bit of a hype now. Why is that? What is it and why is it a hype right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So platform engineering, I define it as the science, but really the art as well of designing and really bringing together all the different tech and tools that you have in an organization, especially your kind of mid-sized, large-sized enterprise engineer organizations, and bring all of that tech and tools into one golden path that enables developer self-service and at the same time reduces the cognitive load on the individual developer, the individual contributor. And so these golden paths are most often referred to as an internal developer platform or IDP. And that IDP is built by a platform engineering team or internal platform team or platform team. And the kind of like the key principle of platform engineering is platform as a product, which means you have a platform team that is really works as a product team and ships a product, which is the platform, to the rest of the engineer organizations who are their customers, the developers. So developers are their internal customers. And that is really one of the kind of like the key differences to something like SRE, which is mainly focused on, reliable production systems, really. And DevOps, which is a culture or philosophy, it was never meant to be a job role technically. And platform engineering is really a new discipline, right? That actually hopes to bring to life the initial tenet of DevOps, which is you build it, you run it. And so if we think about DevOps, because I think this is important context to understand where platform engineering fits in the kind of like in the broader scope of things. DevOps, it came up more than probably 10 years ago at this point, and when it did, the word was a very, very different place, right? We were mainly working on monoliths, running on bare metal. The infrastructure that we were running was insanely less complex than it is right now. You didn't have Kubernetes, GitOps. You didn't have, the CNCF cloud native tooling landscape, which is like hundreds or thousands of different tools that nobody really understands how they fit together. And, and so the time was really different, right? And the initial idea behind DevOps is quite simple and is great, right? It is to remove barriers between developers and operations and facilitate collaboration between them. But the issue is, in reality, for many organizations, what that turned into when you consider all this converging trends of GitOps, cloud native, Kubernetes, IAC, and so on and so forth, is a world where, developers are overwhelmed. They are overwhelmed by this extra cognitive load that is created by all these tools, very complex tool chains, where now just to do a simple deployment to, a preview environment, you want to just like say those two things in one sentence. In some engineering organizations, especially at large scale, that can take, weeks, because you need somebody to provision your a database and set up your preview environment, and then and only then you can like start touching like 10, 15 different like tech tools or complicated scripts just to do one simple deployment, right? And so what that results into is, on the one hand, waiting time and frustrated developers that are just like too afraid of touching all this, spaghetti configuration stuff that they don't want to mess up. And on the flip side of that, you have operations or DevOps, in some cases, teams that are completely overwhelmed and are basically just trying to put out fires and fighting constantly ticket ups. And so when we at Humanitech looked at this, our funding team comes from people who built the platform Xing, which is a big kind of like LinkedIn competitor in Europe that never really took off, but it's still a great company. Our CTO actually built one of the platforms at Google, and we realized that in this whole DevOps revolution, what leading engineering organizations were doing was building platforms, because they immediately realized, hey, there is no way that we can onboard hundreds or even thousands of developers like they were doing every day. And expecting everybody to understand this full, super complex, increasingly complex cloud native setup. And so we need some sort of platform layer here to enable developer self-service on the one hand, and then make ops life easier on the other. And that's kind of where platform engineering was started. And this is where we started also doing the work on our community that happy to talk more about.
Okay, so let's dig a little bit deeper, and I want to compartmentalize a little bit what you were saying right now. So we have DevOps on one end, right, where there was this strive that developers also run their code, right, so that you're not throwing code over and then another person or another team is reliable for even to test it, right? So I think everything came a little bit more closer together over the last, let's say, 15 years, right? So developers took over more responsibility for testing the code, but also for running the code, but then for shipping the code, right? And so now that we have this so close to us, but we have more tooling, it becomes extremely complex, right? So if you are a developer, you should be good, let's say, in JavaScript and React, and you should know maybe some backend, and then you should know some databases, and then you should also know Kubernetes. And I think then already your world explodes, right?
Right.
And then maybe some monitoring and some observability and so on. So it becomes extremely complex. And I think there's not one person that can know everything. And even for teams, it becomes a complex way to do it. And what you're telling me, I think, is that there are all these tools, and then we put them together like pieces and puzzles, and then maybe have some scripts that, glue that together. And then it becomes brittle also and difficult. And so platform engineering teams emerged a little bit out of this need of making that more structured, more systematic, and also having an owner that, takes over the architecting such systems that are based on tools and already technologies, whole technologies that are actually coming into that. Is that a correct understanding of what platform engineering is?
Yeah, you said it really well.
Okay, I have another question for
I
you.
could have said it better myself. Yeah.
What you are also talking is DevOps, and then site reliability engineering, right?
Mm-hmm.
But another thing that comes up in my mind, especially because I worked on that over the last 2 years, is developer experience. And I see a lot
Mm-hmm.
of platform teams that you're talking about, right? Those platform teams also being interested in developer experience, right? Because we want to make the life of developers easier, right? We want them not to sweat because they can't deploy, right? We want them to ship code really, really fast. But I think the idea of really calling it something straight out, like saying it's developer experience, and we are also responsible for that is another task. Do you see that people are really interested in that, or is that only a part of the developer, the platform engineering folks that are interested in developer experience? What's your perspective on that?
Absolutely, yeah. That is, I think, the most important thing that platform teams need to care about is, building that really tight feedback loop with their developer teams, the development teams, and make sure that they really optimize for their day-to-day developer experience, right? And that is where it's so important that you treat your platform as a product that you're shipping, and you treat developers as your internal customers, because otherwise that flow, that feedback loop breaks. And so, what we see in the community and in the market in general, successful platform engineering teams do is, they treat the platform as a product, as we said. They have this really tight feedback loop with developers. They also have a really clear mission and role, which is stated and almost internally marketed as clearly different from a DevOps or SRE team, right? So your mission is not simply, which is not necessarily simple things, right? But is not to worry about maintenance and reliability of your systems, is to improve the developer experience continuously of all the development teams, whatever it is. That is, there needs to be a clear mission that is communicated to the rest of the engineer organization to position the platform team and make sure and set them up for success. That's really important. The other thing that we see successful platform teams do is you know, focus on common problem and really focus on this like minimum common denominator across the engineering organization, right? And so when you're thinking about rolling out a platform, how do you win over your developers? Like, of course, you want to focus on developer experience, but you know, how do you make sure you can't usually roll out to like hundreds or thousands of developers all at once. And so it's really important to focus on that set of problems that you see across the board. There is where the most pain lies, and again, that only comes from like surveys, just general traditional product research, really talking to your customers, and then iterating on the features, and make sure that you don't reinvent the wheel all the time. But you brought up earlier this idea of glue. That's actually a really, really valuable part of the job of platform teams, is really gluing together what is a very complex tool chain into one golden path that makes sense. And I think crucially, you want to provide developers with a choice of what is the right golden path for them, right? So, as an example, what you said, right? You might have a lot of front end, like a junior front end engineer that really wants to worry about React and JavaScript and nothing, and not too much more than that, right? So they don't care whether you're running on EKS, GKE, which region, like they don't care about any of that, right? And so for them, you might want to build a really high level, high abstraction golden path that just lets them, easily deploy and test a small change to their dev environment, and that's it. But then you also might have somebody like a senior backend engineer that really loves messing around with her Helm charts and YAML files and so on. And so what you want to provide to them in that case is the ability of going off path, the ability of messing around with like lower level stuff. And so what we advocate for in the platform engineering community is really a toolbox that platform teams use. There is an unopinionated toolbox to build opinionated golden paths. Why? Because there's no better person than your own platform team to understand what is the right level of abstraction and what does a golden path really means for our organization.
Mm-hmm. So I have many questions. I wrote down actually 4 that are really important, so we have to cover all of them. The first one, I start with the first one, is that how long is it ago? 10 years ago, you know. I would say I was in the platform team, a little bit different. I think it's not exactly the same. Maybe I was more in a it's really early days right back then, right? So but I was working at Microsoft, and at that point it was called tools for software engineers team, right? So we were providing the
Hmm.
tools for the software engineers. um, but what I have seen there, and then actually my team was, you know, reorged, because it grew and grew and grew, right? It became more and more important into one ES, one engineering system, which I think, you know, it's a little bit this idea of first we were responsible for making the build faster for you know, the large organization, which sounds trivial, but if you're running Microsoft or for example Windows, it's not that
Right.
you know, you can really spend some time to optimize this build time, or we were making testing faster or more reliable, or you know, so we were working with different teams really on those problems that they were seeing with testing, with build, with code ownership and so on. um, and then it was because it was becoming more important, it became this large one ES team, right? One engineering platform. And I've seen at that point that a lot of companies tried to, especially larger companies, tried from this very scattered landscape, right? This team is doing it that way, this team is doing it a little bit different, they are using a very different tool chain, into this one engineering system where you say, well, an organization with 200,000 people should all have the same tools, right?
Right.
I think people went a little bit away from that, but there's still a little bit of this idea, which is, I think, different from what you were saying, right? So you were saying, listen to your customers, where what I have seen in the early days, it was more a top-down approach, right? It was like, we want Git, for example, right? So now we have, you know, this tool, or we have this hammer. Let's put it that way, right? We have this hammer that works very well, and we want everybody to use it, right, independent of their situation. Or we want, you know, that everybody does this, you know, does something this way, so that we can keep knowledge, and you know, it streamlines the processes and so on. um, do you still see that, or is there really this focus on, well, depending on what our, you know, customers need, and now these are internal developers within a company, I can have a scattered or a complex, and you know, a landscape that it's not uniform, not coherent.
Yeah, so it can definitely not be a top-down approach, right? And in fact, I was having an interesting conversation this morning with somebody about this, where, you know, we were saying, hey, would the ideal scenario for a platform, for a new platform team be greenfield, right? And it's like kind of like, because from a purely theoretical standpoint, you'd argue, yeah, right? Like, oh, you can choose everything, right? You can pick your perfect stack and like design all the flows and so on. But the issue is the issue with that is then you're already going kind of like the pass route, which is basically saying, hey, I know what's best,
Hmm.
right? And then you all need to like kind of just like fit into this like mold that I've created for this platform. Whereas the I think the ideal scenario actually, and frankly, what we see in the vast majority of cases in practice is, you know, you have a brownfield complex enterprise setup, and now you want to roll out a platform initiative, which means we already have, you know, tens of development teams with their own stack, right? Like these people prefer using you know, Argo CD. These people prefer using Argo plus Jenkins. This is like Circle CI and something else, right? So um, now that's where you understand as a platform team, if you listen, right, and you look closely, that's where you start understanding, okay, I can see some pattern, I can see some preferences, I understand, I talk to them, right? And this is where you start formulating an idea of what this like minimum common denominator is, and that is the starting point of your platform. And I would argue that it's probably actually a better starting point. It might be a more difficult one and a more laborious one than, hey, we can start from scratch and just dream up the ideal platform. But I think is something is one that in the long run will probably you know, come closer to what the developers actually want. And so I think that's actually the best way of approaching it.
Another trend, and I think, yeah, something that evolved over time, when I look at, you know, how platform engineering or whole this industry somehow formed itself, is that, like 10 years back, I only saw people doing what I'm doing at large organizations. I saw people at Microsoft, I
Yes.
saw them at Google. Even Spotify was too small at that point, right? And
Right. Right.
now I see platform engineering teams and the interest for that also at medium-sized companies or startups. Maybe not a two-person show, right?
Right.
But like if they have, I don't know, what's the numbers? 50 people? It could be that there is already somebody responsible for doing that, right? 50 engineers or something. Do you see the same trend? Is it something that just large organizations do, or is platform engineering and thinking about developer experience and this common denominator and so on, is that something that smaller organizations should care about?
Yeah, it's a great question. And actually, you said, I think, the right number. It's about 50, I would say. 30, 50. That's when I think you start seeing the things breaking, right? Because I think you have two scenarios below that threshold, right? Like either you have, people are saying, all right, like I'm just going to go with the past, like something that, maybe like 5 or 10 years ago could have been like in a Roku, for instance. Now you have a bunch of other solutions for that, or like environment as a service type of things. And those are great for, those like smaller use cases. The problem is they don't really scale, right? Like when you start wanting to have this different golden paths that we were talking about earlier, then it becomes really hard because that toolbox is just not flexible enough, right? Um, and then the other scenario is basically you just have your like 10, 15 senior backend engineers, and everyone is kind of like, really comfortable handling your IAC modules and your Kubernetes, like Helm charts and stuff like that, right? And that's also fine, but that also doesn't scale because you can't just hire those people, right, forever. You'll hire more junior people, especially as you scale, and you just can't expect everybody to be familiar with that, especially if they weren't involved in the early stages of building it. And so that's where we start seeing then a trend towards platform teams forming. And you're absolutely right. It trickled down from very large companies to smaller and smaller companies, and I think the threshold, the kind of like the cutting point is around this like 30, 50 engineers. I think also important to mention is the very then I think the question becomes, what is the minimum common denominator? What are the patterns that you see in platform building that you can replicate across the board so that you avoid people reinventing the wheel over and over again. And that's kind of like what we worry about, what we think about constantly at Humanitech. And so, in that case, I always say, hey, if you're like a Google, like of course Google will build their own platform because they have like various, and in fact they have many different platforms internally, right? Because they have like very specific requirements and they're just like at a huge scale, right? But if you're not at that scale of a Salesforce over Google, where you actually have like multiple platform teams internally competing with each other, but you just have like one platform team, then you want to provide that platform team with the best possible toolbox to make them succeed. And you want to make sure they don't reinvent the wheel and just like build the whole thing from scratch, but leverage a combination of, either open source and commercial offerings that give them that initial kind of, foundation that then can be that sort of unopinionated toolbox that we're talking about to go build your own opinionated platform and your own opinionated workflows on top. But I think it's important that you kind of focus as a platform team on that sort of like last mile optimization and not on let me build the entire thing from scratch, which is something that unfortunately we see a lot of people doing. And it can be extremely resource intensive and extremely time consuming, and sometimes it's worth it and a lot of times is not, and we see a lot of organizations underestimate the effort of not just building a platform which can be like 1 or 2 years at any considerable size of company, but also maintaining and improving that platform. And we see actually a lot of organizations making this mistake where they say, hey, we have this platform initiative is going to run for a year, then we're going to have this platform and it's going to be great. And actually, when you ship the V1, that's when the work starts, like with every other product, right? And so it's a lot of work, and we want the platform teams to focus on that optimization part and try and provide them with an initial toolbox to get started.
Okay, so let's let's step a little bit back and look at what's the outcome, right? What's the product really? How can I imagine that, right? So I would say probably in the purest form, it's infrastructure is code. But I think probably to reach that, there are probably many steps. Maybe it's a document at the beginning. Maybe it's GitHub's actions. I don't when we are really small, right? So having this CI/CD pipeline run, right, and we have some GitHub action scripts, or we have some maybe. I mean, could we say we are a platform engineering team if we have Zapier? Take over things from one system to the other. Is that an engineering platform? Or how, what's the form that we are striving for? What's the golden rule? How should that look like? Is it a document? Is that enough? Can we say that's already a platform that we build, that we describe which toolboxes are going in, or that we are using, and maybe there is a Python script and there is a bash script and this is how you run them with those commands? Or I think there's a large variety of forms how we could actually have that, from quite manual to extremely automated. So what is the toolbox that you are talking about? Do I go to GitHub and is there a repository and I download a standard platform engineering boilerplate code and then I start customizing that to my needs? Or how does that work?
Yeah, I love this question. This is such a good question because it's actually something where I think we see the largest gap right now in the both in the community and the market broadly, which is obviously the history of software engineering really is a history of progressive abstraction and platforms, right? So everything is a platform. Everyone wants to be a platform, right? Every tool like markets themselves as a platform. So but I think what we see, specifically around platform engineering, is a focus around two main areas, which is application configurations and infrastructure configurations, right? And so having those two as the kind of like the core pillars of your delivery setup, right? And yeah, your delivery setup kind of like starts in your Git-based system, then goes into your CI, your CD, and then touches all the parts of the infrastructure and from dev to production. And but the one of the I think like fallacies and sort of like anti-patterns that we see out there is especially when there is a top-down initiative around, hey, we need to build a platform because it's cool and people say we should do it. Then kind of like people go into looking at what is the looking at developer workflows chronologically, right? And so then they analyze, all right, where does a developer start when she wants to create a new application, a new service? And it's like, oh, they go and Git and like blah blah. And so then they start looking at they look at this workflow and they're like, all right, this is where we're going to start building the platform, right? And so then the answer a lot of times becomes, for instance, internal developer portals or servers catalogs like Backstage, which, don't get me wrong, it's a great product. They're huge contributors to the community. We're big fans and we work closely with them. But the issue a lot of times, especially if you're not a massive engineering organization, which is the vast majority of cases, is that is not where the value lies, right? If you're trying to think about where is the painful thing, or what is the painful bit for developers within your application and infrastructure configuration world, within your delivery and CI/CD setup, it's usually the configuration management bit. It's not the let me start with with which template and so on for the services or which scaffolding. And so that's where we see most of the focus, and that's where we promote an approach to configuration management that we call dynamic configuration management, and is really focused on dynamically generating config files on the fly at deployment time for developers in a way that basically removes everything that is like the entire kind of like cognitive overload of trying to figure out what are the dependencies, what do I need to do in this specific environment, and so on, and really just like have them work against one single configuration format that then can work in an environment agnostic way across their entire setup. And yeah, so that's kind of where we see the focus in terms of platform engineering. But you bring up a really good point, which is I think the platform engineering community has gone through multiple phases. One was in the last couple of years, which was like the nascent phase of hey, the promise, the initial tenet of DevOps, which is you build it, you run it, can actually be, executed in practice through platform engineering, right? And it was about hammering that idea here and there. And platform engineering really exploded last year. We had Gartner putting it on the hype cycle. Our community quadrupled or more in size, and really there was like a lot of debates. There was a whole controversy on Twitter around DevOps is dead, long live platform engineering. Happy to get into that as well. But like really the platform engineering exploded. And so now, there are a lot of people that are coming into the community, that are coming into this trend and going, okay, like I get it. I'm sold. This is cool. I'm in. Where do I go? Right. And then there's crickets, right? There is no good place for people to get started. There's no blueprints. There's no reference architectures. There's no, just starting points for people. And so this is something that from a community perspective in the platform engineering community, we're focusing heavily on this year. And really, and it's also going to be, in fact, one of the tracks that I'm personally really excited about at PlatformCon 23, which is really just platform blueprints and just bring the practitioners and try and start building. Phase one was about building if you will, a shared framework for how to think about these things. Now is about building and sharing actual blueprints and architectures. And so this is what we're focusing on now.
Yeah, yeah. And coming back to these blueprints, and how can I imagine them? Are they? Is that code? Is that, as I said, Zapier actions? Is it a GitHub action? Is that already, is that enough, or how does that look like, and how is it stored? How do we make sure that it's um, updated? Like especially this
Mm-hmm.
glue, between the systems.
Yes.
What do we do with them? How do you evolve? Are there smells that I can have with them, right? And are they versioned and so on?
Absolutely. They are version, and it goes back to what I was saying earlier, right? They're really like, if you think about it, the two pillars are the application configuration and infrastructure management bit, right? So, um, what that means in practice is, YAML files and Helm charts on the one hand, and IC modules on the other, right? And those live in in your Git-based system, and that's something that is really important and something that we have spent a long amount of time sort of like debating within the community, because the initial kind of instinct of a lot of people when they think about a platform is a dashboard, effectively, right? Is having this like really nice UI that makes especially management really happy, because they can like see what the DORA metrics for the teams are and like click around and so on and so forth. But the reality set is the value really lies into version code, right? To be clear, and that is what developers want, right? So to go back to what we were saying earlier, we've seen many platform teams fail at rolling out their platform because they focus on this kind of like click ops approach
Hmm.
to build a pretty UI, and developers will use it. Well, that actually doesn't work in the vast majority of cases. Why? Because developers really enjoy their their code based workflows, right? Like they work in Git, they push something and so on. They don't want to like jump out into this clunky UI, try and figuring out, okay, what do I need to do now? Like, and then you go back to what you were doing earlier, which is Slack your ops or platform team and like, hey, how do I do this again, right? And so instead is really like the most some of the most successful platform initiatives that we see in the market have really embraced. Again, they listen to developers, they figured out, hey, what do they want? They want code base. This is what they're used to. All right, let's build an interface which is fully code based, and that's the way to go in our opinion.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds good. So another question that I have for you to understand the role and the responsibility of a platform engineering team is, what
Mm-hmm.
about education? Do you provide also education within your organization? Would you go and um, tell people how to use certain tools, or for example how to spin up test environments, how to write those configurations, how to adjust those configurations, or is that something that's outside of the platform engineering responsibilities job role?
No, it's very much in within the set of responsibilities, and I think it's a great question because it kind of it hints at something. I think that a trend that we've seen. So, if you look at it from a historical perspective, right? You go all the way back to kind of like the sysadmin day, which was this poor person in the basement trying to actually like install real servers, and then developers will like throw over the mythical fence, and they try to like, all right, now I need to like actually deploy this thing and make it all work, right? And so the communication was extremely limited. And I think like as you go through like DevOps, SRE, and so on, you see a just like in a correlation of increase in needed communication skills. And I think this is even more true when you look at sort of like the next iteration, which is the platform engineer. Communication skills become extremely important in this role because you need to not only build that really tight feedback loop that we were talking about with developers, you also need to get management and executive buy-in. You need to really being able to like sell this thing internally and work in this multi-stakeholder environment with different teams, right? And then, as you said, train and educate people. As that is an sorry, is an extremely important part of the job, right? And so for sure, I think the key kind of skill set of the platform engineer is, on the one hand, this like product mindset, which maybe not all traditional infrastructure folks necessarily have. I'm sure everybody can adopt it, but it requires a mindset shift towards that. And then the other bit is communication, training, education, and really just evangelize, right? And I mean, you see this is extremely true in very large organizations. We have a couple of talks that I can share with your audience later. One is from Galo Navarro. He gave it at the last platform call in 2022, and is about the salesman tricks of the platform engineers, and how do you sell internally. And another one that I think is really interesting is by Aaron Erickson. He built one of the actually what ended up being the successful platform initiative at Salesforce. And at Salesforce, it was like an interesting situation where you had actually multiple platform teams competing with each other. And if you think about that scenario, your communication skills need to be like on hyperdrive, because it's a little bit like you're in a startup in an open market. You can't just worry about the product that you're building. You really need to worry about like what's your go to market, what's your distribution of your product, right? And so you really need to become like a marketing and salesperson educator.
Yeah. And so, because I'm also training software engineering teams, I want to know, is that part of the platform engineering, or is that a boundary? There must be some boundary where we say, well, training engineers is okay for, let's say, CI and CD pipeline, but we are not training them how to test their systems. Or I'm specializing on code reviews, right? Because they are a big pain point for many organizations, right? And there is actually a lack of training. So is that also something that the platform engineering team would take over, or would worry about how people conduct code reviews and how they do that? Or is that outside, let's say, testing, code reviews, let's say secure coding practices, right? We can span that even further, right? So where is the boundary of what is still, part of a platform engineering team and their education to the organization, and what's outside of that?
Yeah, I mean, a bit of a cop-out answer maybe, but it depends, right? So if you're, I think if you are a small platform organization, obviously you're not going to have a ton of resources to kind of everybody needs to wear all the hats, right? We've definitely seen very large companies where they had dedicated evangelists and trainers just for their platform initiative, right? So I think it's a question of resources. But in general, I think, it's not necessarily the actual engineer, maybe, that is, the people actually building the platforms and shipping features for it that are the main evangelists. I would say, a really active role is played by the product manager. And I think the PM of the platform is actually an extremely interesting position, And in fact, in the platform engineering Slack, one of the most active channels is the product management channel. Because there's so many dimensions to, PMing a platform, is all this, everything that we talked about is like, you want to be the glue, you need to position yourself with executives, not as a cost center, but as a value driver. You need to evangelize it, right? And a lot of that needs to be driven on a product management level. And so I think, to answer your question, at a small scale, for sure, the PM. And a larger scale, you're going to have the PM is going to be supported by a dedicated sort of like evangelist team.
Yeah, yeah. So I have another question for you. For example, when I was doing this study on developer experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
There were some concerns, and I hear that over and over again. There are concerns that engineers do not know best, right? So you were saying at the beginning, you were saying, oh, you go to your customers because they know best what they need and so on, right? But sometimes, it's coming up over and over when I'm talking with people. There are some skeptics that say, well, maybe they don't know best. Not all of them know best because maybe they haven't been
Right,
exposed to something else, right? Maybe they haven't seen
right,
faster review cycles. Maybe they haven't seen how, a fully automated CI/CD works like. Maybe they are working against a standard or a status quo, where if you're not bringing outside, ideas, we will get stuck into, doing things how we always did them, right? Do you see that as well? That can happen. Shipping, I don't know, shipping every 3 months is seen as normal and actually fast, but actually what we want to know, and if we compare and benchmark with, the successors and the leading companies, we should ship 3 times per day, right?
right. Yeah, absolutely. And that's, I think, that's where really you see whether you have a good platform team or not, right? Because, building a tight feedback loop with developers doesn't mean blindly listening to them, right? It means, listening and like weighing. And I think one of the advantages that platform teams have right now is if you're a platform engineer, you're very likely to be, you know, quite like probably an early adopter and pretty much on the cutting edge of the whole cloud native and sort of like tech stack conversation right now. So in that case, you have somebody that usually is somebody that is driving already innovation by default, and then can sort of like find what's the right level of drive and how far it can push with developers listening to them, right? That's certainly something that could change, and over time. And I think the key is what is this system of checks and balances that we can put into place, because what is true of developers can also be true of platform engineers themselves, right? We have seen certainly platform teams that have fallen for this fallacy of, oh, this like shiny new tech that came out and I'm really excited about, and everybody is saying it's amazing, and it's going to solve all our problems, and let me just like try to like fit it somehow as a square peg in a round hole, into our platform design, and that obviously can create more harm than good. And so yeah, I don't think there is a perfect answer. Just be thoughtful.
Yeah. So maybe for beginners, right? And also to round up our interview today, if I'm a beginner or maybe new to platform engineering, and I'm wondering, is that actually something for our organization? Would that help us? Should we start something like that? What's a good place for me to go and find resources about platform engineering, and even make up my mind if that will be a good investment of our time?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, platformengineering.org is probably the best place to start. You have a blog there with a lot of resources. Internal developer platform.org as well is an actual repo where, is open source. People can do their own PRs and commits, and we see, there's a really good rundown of what are all the tools, what are the problems, what are the core principles. So those are two extremely good places to start, platformengineering.org and internal platform.org. And then from there, you can join, the Slack channel and really just get into the weeds of it. There are 8,000 plus platform practitioners, some extremely experienced that have built, the platforms at Walmart, at Apple, and some that are just getting started just like you, right? And so that's a perfect place, I think, to just get a feeling for the lay of the land. And I think also platformcon.com, we just updated the website, with the new edition in 23 is going to happen in June. We're expecting 150 to 200 talks by some of the best leading, DevOps and platform practitioners. And so that's free. And it's virtual, so people can join from anywhere. So that's also a really good place
That's
to
really
start.
cool. Yeah. I will link all of that in my show notes. The last question that I have for you is, it must be a short one. What are the 3 benefits that people get out of, the 3 main benefits that people get out of if they are investing in platform engineering? What do you think?
Self-service, no frustration, and no ticket ops.
No ticket ops. What's that?
Oh, ticket ops is just, ops team basically being like bombarded with inbound ops requests by the development teams, right? And so the idea is like, the benefits of platform engineering, the benefits of a platform are on the developer side. I don't need to wait any longer. I don't need to slack my ops. I can just self-serve what I need to run my apps and services independently. So no frustration, self-service. And on the other side of the equation is no ticket ops, no living my life as a glorified, stressed out help desk, and just working, frankly, on better problems, like more interesting problems. Optimize your production setup, not stand up the same PostgreSQL for the 10th time.
Yeah. Will AI do that for us in 2 years?
Who knows? It seems like AI is gonna do everything. So
Can do a
maybe.
lot, right? Yeah, we are all obsolete. They will do the interview that we just did, just better.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Well, Luca, thank you so much for being on my show. I really
Thank you.
enjoyed talking to you and learning all about platform engineering. And thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I hope people find it interesting.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
All right.
This was another episode of the Software Engineering Unlocked podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, please help me spread the word about the podcast. Send the episode to a friend via email, Twitter, LinkedIn, whatever messaging system you use, or give it a positive review on your favorite podcasting platform such as Spotify or iTunes. This would mean really a lot to me. So thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will talk to you in 2 weeks. Bye.